Our theme right now is writing great website copy, and so I thought you might like to know the 6 rules that I follow. Ironically, yes, I realize I am following rules whenever I write any kind of copy for the web, whether it's an about page, a services or work with me page, a sales page, email sequences, opt-in pages, Facebook ads, it doesn't matter. I'm always going to follow these 6 rules. In fact, I've been following these rules so long that it actually took me some time to remember what they were because they're so ingrained into my head and my entire writing process. You can and you should follow these rules anytime you write any of the copy, like the kind of stuff I just mentioned, but it should probably go without saying that this is the Rule Breakers Club, and so sometimes it's okay to break any one of these rules. Just make sure that you do it sparingly and that you have a good reason for doing so. Rule number 1 is to think about one person every time you write. So I always think of just one person every time I create a video, for instance, a blog post, a Facebook Live session. When you think about that one person, or as I like to call them, your muse, then it inspires you to really have a conversation with that person, and it becomes a lot easier to know what to say. I think a lot of what stumps us is we're trying to talk to too many different people, and we know that if we say any one thing, we're alienating all the rest of the group, which actually isn't true. If you haven't been through my free training, The Rainbow of Sales, then I highly recommend doing that because it's going to help you to come up with those muses and the language that's going to work for those muses for your specific business. Rule number 2 is to use what I like to call the girlfriend filter. So this is for my ladies out there. I want you to think about when you're writing any piece of copy, and this is, again, really good for people who are stuck in corporate, academic, or boring sounding writing, and you feel like you just can't write in a conversational way. I want you to picture that when you're writing, you're sitting down for a glass of wine at happy hour with one of your best friends talking about this topic, or maybe you're sitting down and talking to your muse. And I want you to ask yourself, would I say it this way if I were talking to my friend? I actually want you to read the writing out loud and ask yourself, would I ever say this, or does it sound utterly ridiculous to say out loud? Rule number 3, and this is a little bit of a nerdy grammar one, is to get rid of weak verbs. You'll notice that every single one of my points for almost every single one of my blog posts and every bullet point on every sales page or opt-in page I write starts with a verb. Weak verbs are things like gerunds or verbs that end in ing. It's also any form of the verb to be. So is, are, am, being, any form of the verb to be is likely going to be a weak verb. And it's a weak verb because it's a verb that doesn't really mean anything. And it's also a weak verb because it's often an indication that you're using the passive voice. So I won't nerd out on this too much if you're like, afraid of grammar. It's totally fine. What I want you to do is go back to a blog post or something that you wrote recently, even if it's just an email, and I want you to actually go and highlight every time you used the verb to be and see if you can't come up with a more specific verb that you can use instead. So just an example of this would be if I were to say, I was hit by her, it would be a passive voice because I am the subject, but I'm not doing the action. Someone else is doing the action. So I was hit, see that was in there is an indication that we're using the passive voice, though that's not always the case. And the way that we can make that active would be to change it around and say, she hit me. So that's just a really silly little example that you can use to go and look through your writing and see if you can fix these verbs. The reason I bring this up is because this is something that I was taught, passive voice, by a Russian, like an old Russian professor that I had in college, and she taught me everything that I know that makes me a good writer. This one trick, and it is a trick, when I flipped this, when I started using active verbs and more specific verbs instead of passive voice and weak verbs, I started getting more A's on my papers in writing. Literally just switching this one thing. And she actually told our entire class that that would happen. So I promise you that by doing this one thing, you're going to resonate with people more in your writing. Rule number 4, this is one I talk about a lot when it comes to sales pages, and this this is really true with online writing versus more traditional writing, and that is to stick to very short paragraphs. People are in a hurry online, they're distracted, and you've got to stop throwing so much blocks of text at them. I rarely write paragraphs that are more than 3 sentences for exactly this reason. Rule number 5, which piggybacks on rule number 4, is that you need to format for scannability. So not just by having short paragraphs, I also want you to use more headlines, subheadlines, bullet points, and boldings. The key here is to use these elements sparingly, because the other flip side of this, and I see this happen a lot, is people overdoing the bold headlines and the bullet points and the subheadlines. And when you do too much of it, it actually loses the entire effect. So you want to make sure that you are doing it enough to really call out to the places you want people's eyes to go to. And one thing that can help you with that is rule number 6, our last rule, and that is to spend words like you'd spend your money. The first part of the writing process is to do a brain dump or a free write to get all of your ideas down on paper. But if you have a problem with wordiness and you know it, then I'm going to challenge you to cut down all of your copy by 50%. Until you know that there are no superfluous words in any of your copy, I really want to challenge you to cut down that word count. And there you have it. Those are my 6 rules for writing copy on the web. I hope you loved it. I would love for you to leave a comment below and let me know, what is the one rule that you're going to go implement right now? And if you haven't done the active verb one, that is the one that I really want to challenge you to do, because I think it's the one that not a lot of people are talking about, but can make a really big difference in the effectiveness of your writing.